Okay, so today's topic is advanced Cherwell tips and tricks. We actually ran this presentation just last week. So I was wondering if anyone on the call saw last week's presentation. I'm wondering what content might be repeat. So if you know how to use the raise your hand functionality, please go ahead and click on that. If you don't see any panels, you should see an orange box with a white arrow. Click on that and you should see a place where you can raise your hand. But if you were on last week, let me know, and then we can tailor the content as we need. So as I mentioned, it's tips and tricks, advanced tips and tricks. We've got Kim Euchre, who's one of our senior consultants on staff. For anyone who may be viewing this as a recording, if you're unfamiliar with Stratacom, we are a Cherwell partner for professional services. We've been doing IT service management consulting since 1997, focused specifically on Cherwell for the past 6 years. We hope you enjoy the recording. So with that, why don't we go ahead and kick off? I did not see a raised hand by anyone, Kim, so the content should be new for our viewers today. So whenever you're ready to start sharing your screen, I don't see it now.
I have not received a request to share yet, Laura.
Okay, I just sent it 2 minutes ago. I just sent it again now. Do you see it?
Not yet. Normally I get, there we go. So
okay, maybe it's just a bit slow.
Okay, can you see my screen?
We see it.
Okay.
And just a reminder before Kim kicks off, if you have any questions due to the nature of this content, we're going to be going through a variety of different topics. So if you have questions, I'd like to encourage you to ask them as we go along while we're still in that topic area. So you can pop those questions into the questions panel. Again, if you don't see it, use that orange button with that white arrow. That'll expand your questions pane. So please do ask questions as we get going. All right, Kim, it's all yours.
Fantastic. We're going to talk about Cherwell tips and tricks, and these are some things that you can do to just quickly move around and do things inside Cherwell. The first question I have is I want to autofill based on a change in more than one field. So what I might use this for is maybe I'm changing categorization based on whether or not the priority changes or whether or not there's a different, a higher level user, maybe they're going to get some, anyway, I want to change one field based on a variety of different fields that might affect it. So I have a field A, B, and C, and in this particular case, I'm just showing where I just want to update the last changed anytime field A, field B, or field C changes. So if and here you're seeing the result of that. And then, so the solution is, let's take a look into it. Number one, we're going to create a field that holds the calculation of the fields, and that is our trigger field. And then on the field we want to auto-populate, we're going to set the auto-populate to our trigger field, and then we're going to fill as needed. So I know that all sounds like Jabberwocky, but we're going to walk through this. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to log on here to our Cherwell system. And I'm going to go to our demo table here. So here I have lookup field A, lookup field B, lookup field C. I have that last change. That's what I'm going to auto-populate. And I have this thing called a temporary holding field. So we're going to go and look at this temporary holding field. And what I have done in here is I have set this temporary holding field as a calculated field, and it is equal to exactly the contents that are held in lookup field A, B, and C. So here you can see that it holds lookup field A, lookup field B, and lookup field C. So now my last change field, which is my auto-populated field, is looking at not when lookup field A, B, or C changes, but when my temporary holding field changes. And then I am just putting in the current date and time. So here we can and this is a really clever little trick, and we use it a lot. Like I said, when we want to manage more than one thing changing. I mean, a lot of times we're like, well, I want to update this field. For example, specifics. Specifics is a fabulous example because maybe I wanted to auto-populate the specifics field based on whether or not the service changes or the category changes or the subcategory changes. That's a really good use for this. And then whenever any of those change, I want to update my specifics to use. So here you can see that there's lookup. So I put in the field value, it changed. I put in another field value, it changed again. I put in another field value on this one. So every time any one of those changes, it will update. And it's really just that simple. Okay, so let's go back here. And then we're going to go and continue. Then on a did you know, the system maintenance tasks. There's a couple things on the system maintenance where you go to the orange, the pill and the administrator, and you navigate to database and then to system maintenance. One of the things here is a remove unused user accounts. And this will clean up customer accounts that have been disabled but are possibly not completely removed. So you may have encountered this when you were trying to maybe migrate between development and production, and you have rebuilt and re-imported all of your LDAP users, and now you're trying to set up new credentials for them, but all of a sudden it's saying, well, I already have credentials for this person, and you're like, but I never created them, and since I've imported them. And that's one of those situations where you may have created them under a previous import, and what you do is you just need to come in. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Come in here and remove unused user accounts, and then you'll be able to then continue on and then create your customers, the portal accounts. The other thing here is synchronizing the team info business object with the team list. There are a lot of different situations that can leave your team info business object and your teams defined in the Cherwell administrator out of synchronization. This option will synchronize those two sources. I should say though that you want to be very careful because when you're, you only want to usually use one method to import or to update your teams. Either update them and bring them in through the administrator or update them and bring them in from the client. The synchronization problems will definitely occur a lot of times when you're updating those records from both places. Also, if you are updating those records from both places and then kind of like then moving those onto another system, like you're going from development to production, you will also see a lot of those problems at that as well. The best the advice I can give you on that is if you do run into problems when you're synchronizing, you want to export your team info business and then re-import it from a CSV and delete all those tables and re-import them and rebuild those teams. Make sure when you export, you take along the rec ID so you get the same rec ID when it imports back into the table. Any questions, Laura? Okay. Now I have
Sorry, Kim, no questions. I was on mute. If anyone does have questions, now is a great time to ask them before we move on to the next topic. But I don't see anything coming in, so I think it's okay to move ahead.
This is a subject that is interested, most people are interested in this topic. I have too many specifics fields, or I didn't know that there was a limit on the specifics table. There's lots of different reasons why you might come up against this limit. SQL tables permit a maximum of 1,024 fields in a single table, and I've exceeded that capacity on my specifics, or I'm nearing exceeding the capacity on this table. What can I do? Well, number one, a little bit of history and knowledge is that specifics are group members, and all of the fields for each one of those specifics members count toward that total. And what can you do? Well, there's a lot of little clever tricks, and let's go through a few of them. My business case, I can only get 1,024 fields in a single table. Well, solution number one is maybe you've used a lot of checkboxes in your system, and there's a lot of really valid reasons to use checkboxes. So for example, I have a lot of different locations that I have, and when I'm checking off, I'm saying install this software. I'm saying maybe install this software at these offices, and so I'm checking these offices off in my ticket and in my specifics. Well, each one of those checkboxes, the logical, even though it only takes up a single character, it takes up one of those 1,024. So they can chew up space very, very quickly. And there's a clever way to work with those. So the first thing I'm going to do is make all of those fields not stored in the database. And I know that sounds anti-intuitive because this is the whole idea, to store the data. Well, yes, but we're going to have another way around that. So number one, we're going to check off those fields to not store them in the database. And then we're going to go through and we're going to create a text string that stores all the names of the fields. So for example, if I have a, location one, I'll just say Minneapolis, for example. If I have a location one that's Minneapolis, this check one might say Minneapolis. Location two might say Washington, D.C. I mean, so on down the line. So I'm going to actually build each one of these out so that they store the text of what the initial name was of the field. So, for example, if this was Minneapolis, it would say Minneapolis here in Washington, etc. Then the last step of that is that I'm going to change these checkboxes, no longer stored. I'm going to change those into a calculated value, and they are going to check or uncheck based on the this text field that I created, whether or not it is like the value that is in for that particular item. And I can go ahead and show you this as well. And I have started using this trick all the time. So in other words, I don't wait until it's a problem. I build my stuff this way because it's a lot cleaner and it's a lot better in the long run. So here I've got my checkboxes. So these are not stored in the database. However, they are persistent. So even after I've saved my ticket and I refresh, they're still there. Oops, I must have done one incorrectly. There's an example of one that I did not do correctly. So let's go fix it. So we're going to come back over here. And we're going to look at check 6. So first off, I'm going to look at the way I stored the data. And I know that check 6 was my problem, so I'm going to go directly here to this one. And it says, if the demo check 6 is equal to true, then check 6. Well, that's great, but I did miss a semicolon there because I've been putting semicolons between each one of them. So we're going to go ahead and leave it that way. See, otherwise, it's either the name check 6 or it's empty. Great. So now I'm going to edit my check 6 field. First of all, as you can see, it is not stored in the database. So it's not taking up any location. It's not taking up any storage, nothing. So now I'm going to go to the properties, go to the calculated value. And here we can see that it is asking the text storing field like check 6, and notice that semicolon there. So the semicolon was missing at the very beginning of that. So we're going to go ahead now and just quickly publish this. I should have turned off the scan. Okay. And so now I'm going to reload my definitions. And now when I click check 6, it will save just fine. That's how easy that was. I mean, you even got to see me fix one of them too. So very, very simple. And so we're going to continue on there. Another way is to reuse your fields. And because a specifics is a group member, one thing that's very unique to the group members is that each one of the calculations, each validation, each whether it's required, all of those fields, all of those properties are all unique to that particular member. So I can have a field that is like a text field 1, for example, and I can have it be something specific in my first specific and something different in my second. It can be anything I want it to be, as long as it has a it'll just share the same real estate, but it could mean something different from one or the other. You may want to change the label on it, and here's how you would do that. So from the business object, I would say add field from group, and then I would add my field. My field was called named field. And then I edit the field, and I want to change the late name on the field, but I don't want to change the label. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually copy the internal name called named field. And then I'm going to go up here and change the name to whatever I want it to be. And you'll notice that it'll change the internal name as you start to type. And once I'm done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to then go back into my internal name, and I'm going to paste the internal name that I copied. It's important to note that the internal name is the name that is stored on SQL for the field. So you want to take special care not to modify that unless you really want to modify it. And I can actually show you that as well. We can come in here. I don't have any other fields because this is not a group object. Let me go to specifics. So I'm going to go and add another field from the group. I'll say this field. And I don't want to change the name, the internal name, but I want to change that label. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy. And you'll notice here when I start to type, again, it tried to update that internal name. I can override that by just going in there and just setting the internal name back. So my record will still have the internal name that it was given, and it'll have this new label only when I'm dealing with specifics, email, and calendaring. Oops. So another way, here's some other recommendations. Obviously, review is very, very important. Always analyze existing fields first before you go to create a new field. Make sure that new field is really warranted. And there's lots of ways to get creative with reusing existing fields. And that leads into the second, reuse fields as often as possible. Another way that you can actually get past this problem is actually to divide specifics. Specifics are just like tasks, so they really could be used for a number of different alternatives and different things if needed. you could actually create different specific tables. You could actually have a change specifics or a request specifics, or even specifics by service. Like depending on how many fields you really had and how big your workflows were, you could have like account specifics or HR specifics. And that would actually isolate then that data for those types of records inside that particular table. And you can retrieve the number of SQL columns that you currently are using by using this select count right here that you see below. And that is actually going to retrieve from SQL the number of columns that is currently being used in your specifics table. And also something that's important to note is that fields that are defined to the group leader are automatically inherited into the group member. Let's take a look at that. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go, by the way, in case you weren't aware, anytime you see a little like italics and you see a little asterisk there, that means that this item is part of this particular blueprint, that it has been changed. So now I'm going to go up to the specifics leader, and I'm going to add field from group, and I'm going to say I want the assigned CIs in every single one of my specifics. So I added it here on the specifics group leader, and you'll notice now, because I did, oh, look at that. Every single one of my specifics members has now changed. And if I go into any one of them, that assigned CIs has now been added to each one of those members. Laura, are there any questions yet?
I don't see any questions yet. It's a great time to ask if you have any on this topic.
Okay, I'll continue.
All right.
Another neat little tip is you can make a system dashboard to manage your system setup. Let me go ahead and show you that. I'm a fan of not needing to use the orange pill when you don't have to. You know, when you can do something with data, and it's a lot faster and it's a lot cleaner that way. So if I brought my production system over and I've now loaded it into this database, I can actually set my current system just by coming here. You'll notice that it already is dev, but maybe it hadn't been. Maybe when I came to this dashboard, it was already production. And you'll notice here, so it currently says that it is production. It says that the default recipient is none because in production, the real people get the emails. So there is no default recipient in production. Your sender, it says that it's support@company.com. And so now I'm going to go ahead and change it to dev. And note that my default recipient changed and also my sender changed too, because maybe I had configured dev and I haven't configured production yet. I can very easily set buttons to change each one of these. So I could add someone at mycompany.com. And you'll notice that that immediately changed my default recipient. Or I can change my sender. Again, oh, that was the test sender, and now this is the production sender. So I can actually change both of those. I could have left it alone to leave it to not change it, or I can. So now I've changed both the production and the test sender. but I did not need any administrator options. I just was able to go in and manage this as needed. If you have BOMGAR installed, you could use this to manage some of your BOMGAR settings. You can use this to manage some of your SLA settings, organization setup. Here's some information about your incident customer settings. What about for your light admins, those who don't get into the administrative tool but may need to update information such as the incident subcategory tables? Imagine little buttons here that said go to incident categories, go manage incident categories, manage incident subcategories. So just by a button click, you can actually deliver some of that table management data and abilities without actually giving them table management. So there's a lot of really good reasons to use a system administrator dashboard like this. Next, we're going to go through validation of specifics from Cherwell. And as of version 7, Cherwell changed the way it actually manages. Prior to version 7, when it delivered an out-of-the-box database, it always delivered it using this populate using map. And after version 7, Cherwell extended their other validation types so that you can click here on the other validation types, click on validate business object name, and then select members of a group, and then members of specifics, of course. And then that will, when in the drop down for this particular field, it's going to give you a list of all of the members of the table specifics. Then on your auto populate for the specifics ID, you can come in here, do your auto populate. When there's a change in the specifics name, which was populated here, it's going to give you another little thing to check, and that's business object ID. That is so much easier than in the past you've had to do. If you're not hosted, you had to do a loopback connection. If you were hosted, a lot of times you had tables that you were managing individually that captured that information. And so this allows you to do all of that without any of that extra added effort. The next thing is I want to get access to my security group. What I'm going to show you here is for people who are on-premise. People who are hosted would have to kind of manage this a little bit more manually than what I'm going to show you. So I need access to the security group the user is in, and my requirements necessitate that I have access to the name. Is it possible that I can get that information, like to use for security or to use to drive, forms? You can do it. For on-premise, we're going to create an external connection that points right back at your same database. You'll often hear me refer to this as like a loopback database. And so the next thing is I'm going to create a database server object with this view that you see here. And I'm not going to read the whole view. It's just, that's the view that, that's the view that creates it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a new external lookup table that is bound to this view. And then the fourth step is that on user info, I'm going to create a new security group field, create a relationship to my view, and then create a calculation that updates it from this view. Whoops, excuse me. And so we're going to come over here, and we'll look at this a little bit. In my managers, I have my database external connections. Here we go. And I've created a loopback. And what I mean by a loopback is that it's a single server connection. It's pointing directly at the same server and the same database that I'm currently using. And then I'm logging on with my credentials. I can test this, and of course it tests successfully. And so I have a loopback now that binds this Cherwell that I'm looking at back to the back end. And why would I want to do that? Well, because I need access to some of those hidden tables that you don't see in the foreground. some of those trebuchet tables. So the next step is I'm going to come here and I'm going to go to the database server objects. And I have this view security group. And it's a view that I've created. So that can be any name. I just happen to start it with the word view. It's a server object of a type of view. And there is my SQL that creates that view that I showed you. And then, of course, the drop is just drop view name. And then, it just says drop it anytime the table's changed, because it'll get recreated. And then the third step is then what I do is I go and I've created a new lookup table. And it's right here. So what I did is I actually went new external business object. Instead of saying new business object, I said new external business object. The first thing it's going to ask me is, well, do I want to import or link to the data? Well, obviously I want to link to the data because I always want the data to be what it is in the trebuchet table. I don't want to have to maintain that data separately if I don't have to. And then what connection am I using? Well, I'm using that loopback connection. It requires an external connection here, so if you don't have a connection, you need to build one. And then I choose choose a table to map, And so the table to map in this particular case is my view. And then what type of business object do I want it to be? Well, I want it to be a lookup table. And now what fields do I want to map? Well, I want to map all fields. I don't want to pick and choose. And so it was that easy to pull in all of those fields. And then I just picked the field that holds the unique key. And the data is read-only because I don't want to be updating this data. I just want to be reading from this table. And so you need to specify your SQL Server. And I can't create this right at the moment because it has the same name. I did not mention, but I should, that creating the loopback, step 1, you have to publish in between there. After you create the next step, step 2, you have to run a blueprint in between there, because each one of those things, like the view, does not exist until after you've actually published. So that new view would not be able to, a new table would not be able to build on that view until the past step is already completed. So there should be a publish in between each one of those. And then going ahead and looking at the user info, which I still have not downgraded it. I went ahead here and I actually added a section to the middle of this table, and it says security group. So then this security group would be I created a relationship from the user info that user has a security group. And then here, I actually added a section that included that security group field and made this calculated. There it is. And I just set it equal to the def name from the security group table that I had created. So what this is going to do is it is always going to keep this updated, the security group table, with the data that is in that view. Laura, are there any questions on that?
I still don't see any questions. We've got a quiet group today.
If you're hosted, you don't have the ability to create those external connections, and you don't have the ability to walk through and create some of those the views. So what you would do instead is you would just create a new field on your user info table. You would manage a drop-down list that contains your security groups, and then you could just go ahead and do a double entry and update that security group as required. So you would still have the security group at the top of your user info, which you'll notice doesn't show on this internal form. If you remember when you're adding a user, your security group is located up here, which is outside of your user info. And so basically you would just do double entry. And so you would select your security group of admin or first responder, and then just come down here and select the same thing down here. And it is important to note that when you make a change to something that is outside of this form on your users, it does not trigger a change or an update on the data inside this form. You actually would have to update something in this form in order to make a change occur. That's another little gotcha on that. Well, the next thing is I want to control display of record data based on information in a user's record. And so my data from my users, the current user logged on, is required during the load or display of the incident. So, Cherwell provides you access to the current user's rec ID and the current user's name, but it does not require you, or does not provide access at all times to all of the other data in the record. And I need a way of pulling data from my own custom or obscure fields to control display or hiding of information on the form. So for example, I might have a field that says part of operations security or something like that. So if I have that checkbox selected, maybe additional fields show up on the form. And and also I did want to mention that, another good way to get information is that some of the information, of course not custom information, is available through the user customer expressions, but those are not always available and they cannot be used on the left-hand side of a query in security expressions. So what did I mean by all of that? Number one, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come to incident, and I have created a new relationship. We go to incident owns or links to current user. There we go. So this is a links relationship. It's a one-to-one. It's incident and user info. I go to the links and I'm setting up a constraint where the user info rec ID, the GUID, is equal to the current user rec ID. You notice there's nothing about incident in this constraint. It is truly just who is currently logged on, and that's all that matters. And so it doesn't matter if I'm on incident 1, incident 5,000, this relationship is always going to have the same relationship as long as I am logged on. The relationship is to me, not to the ticket. And so what that enables you to do is that enables you to pull information. And first I'm going to go and show security here. So if I'm actually on security and I wanted to, set a business object rights on change request, for example, I'm sorry, on incident. That's the one I was working with. I want to, on incident, and I want to change my, limit my records based on criteria. I'm going to go ahead then and look in this list for that relationship. Well, if I scroll down, I'm going to say, oh, there it is. And you'll notice it says incident, because there were two user info ones, and it's the user info incident links to current user. That's the one that I want. So now I can pick any of these fields from here. And let's see, I want the department and so I was able to limit the records based on that criteria. The one thing you will notice here in the left, I have everything that is associated to an incident. I have my incident, I have the incident owner, I have all those things that have a one-to-one relationship to incident. What I don't have in this list, I don't have the list that has the expressions. like I would get on the right. So you'll notice that it ends here with my last table. On the right-hand side, I have the ability to map a data value to an expression, but I don't have the availability to map an expression to a data value. And so that's one of the reasons why this is so powerful and so important to do that to any of those tables that you might need to have extra management for. And the other thing I wanted to show with this, Laura, is we're going to come in here with the new blueprint, and we're going to go to Manager's Expressions and start a new expression. And in case you were not aware, there's a lot of information, very cool information you can get from the user customer data. So you change your editor to user customer data, and now we can look at a specific attribute and pull that attribute for the user, pull the attribute for the customer, or pull the attribute for the current user or customer. What I use this for a lot is I have my current customer, I have like whoever it happens to be, and I want their manager name or manager ID. And so where's my customer ID? So this is what identifies my customer ID, is the incident customer ID field. And then it is going to go and pull the manager ID for that particular customer. That's a pretty quick way to get some of the information through those relationships, because those relationships can be used when you're building emails. Really neat way to go. And so again, I've detailed how to do this. And another good thing is to set this up on all of your major business objects. Then when you need that information, you already have it available through those relationships. The next thing is I need dynamic access to a single current value from a lookup table. And I have the public ID of the team I want, operations, but I need access to the rec ID. So I'm on a dashboard, so I'm unable to run auto-populates or pull from a different field. How do I do this? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get into metrics. And when you need dynamic access, you can use metrics as your solution. Well, metrics were designed to really pull statistical data. Metrics can be used as dynamic queries, and then you can select the first occurrence of the data you're looking for, such as the rec ID. So we'll show that. And we go from over here to the dashboards and metric manager. And we'll go ahead and create our metric. So the business object, I'm pretending, well, I'll just use a stored value. I could be looking at, actually I'm going to look at team info here. And my return value, I want text. And then so my criteria is going to be where the team name is equal to, and I could even specify a prompt here. So in that particular case, it's going to, every time I run this metric, it's going to actually ask me, well, what team do you want? I pick the team. And so it's going to go and do that query. And then in the value, I have first or last. And that's assuming that the value occurs more than once in the table. I always just use the first. And then My field is going to be the field that I want to return, for example, the rec ID. That could also be, like if you're sending out emails, that could have been the email alias for the team. But so in this particular case, I wanted the rec ID, and so that's all I really had to do. And that will update every time I use the metric on that dashboard. Laura, are there any questions there?
I still don't see any questions.
Okay. Automatic values that are available on a record. Did you know? The most common request is often to assess whether or not a record has attachments. And you can do this by navigating to the automatic folder, which only exists when you're actually in a ticket. And so you can actually open that automatic folder and you can see your attachment count. You can see whether it has attachments. Even you can see whether or not it's been modified, which a lot of times you might hear that word called if it's dirty. You know, a lot of times, like if it's been modified, that's called the form is marked as dirty. So, and then you can also identify whether or not the record is new. Automatic fields are not searchable. They may only be accessed when you're actually on a displayed record. So now the next thing is that my users need to search on those records to see if those records contain attachments. Can I do that as well? You can. Let's look at how we solve that. I'm going to make the number searchable. First of all, I'm going to have to create my own field. So I've created a number of linked attachments on my incident table. And then I set the calculation off of the number of linked attachments to use that automatic attachment count that I had in the automatic folder. And that's going to trigger an update on the record. So the record must be saved when you add an attachment to properly update the field to make it searchable. Because if you don't save the data, then the data is going to still be whatever it was the last time you used it. So that's why you need to save it after you've actually recalculated it. And so this will allow you to search on those tickets that have attachments. And so you would need to repeat that for each one that you want to use that feature on. And I can show you how to do that. I don't recall if I've actually added that field here. I had not. So we're going to add number of linked attachments. I'm going to go into auto-populate. I'm sorry, I didn't mean auto-populate, I meant calculate. And I'm going to set that calculated value equal to my attachment count. And so now I have a way, I need to turn that off. Now I have a way of every time having that be searchable. So every time the record is updated, that number of linked attachments will also update as well. And this is a really cool little trick because I use this all the time. You can move data, lookup data through a blueprint, but there is really no way to move major and or supporting data through a blueprint. But we can, using a blueprint, if we actually make our own little table here. So the first thing I've done is I've created a new table, and I've called it underscore move business object data. And the reason why I created it with the underscore is it's always going to show up first in the list. So then I create fields for each table I want to manage in that business object. You can make them the fields any size you want because you're never going to be adding data to this table. You're really only using this to migrate data. And then I validate each field from its internal Cherwell location. So service catalog templates get validated from service catalog templates. Incidents would get validated from incidents, although I'm not sure why you would want to move incidents, but the fact is you could. But there's a lot of lookup data that happens to be stored in major business objects, like service catalog templates, like work units, SLAs. Those are all valid pieces of data that really you may want to migrate instead of actually making those changes at migration time. And the next thing I do is I create a blank form, and I put a statement on this form that indicates that it has been purposefully left blank. So if we come over here to the lookup tables, you'll see here I called it Move Cherwell Data. And if we go look at our form, it's a very, very simple form. So there, even if a person tried to add a record, there wouldn't be anything for them to add because it actually says that, this form is intentionally left blank. So you can't add anything. And so here you see, let's go to Service Catalog Template. So we go to our validations, and we're validating from the Service Catalog Template table. And that's all we're doing. It doesn't even have to match the right number of characters, because what I'm going to do here is when I'm actually moving and migrating my data from development to production, I'm going to come to this table, click on my Edit Table Data. Maybe I didn't click on it, sorry. When I click on the Edit Table, and then it's going to bring up all of those things, I can pick and choose here whether or not to include or delete or whatever I want to do with that data on the destination system. So I can click on add all those to my blueprint. And so that was just for the service catalog template, but you notice there's other ones for SLA, for work units, for work unit joins. By the way, customers does not work because it's a group object. I had inadvertently put it into this list. But you could have service, you could have incident category, incident subcategory. You could have any of that data that, all in one place, then you go to find it and move it to your production system. And then you publish and you're done. So, and like I said, anytime you want to move your data, you just open your blueprint, go in and find that field and that record, and then just go and include it and save and publish. And also, don't forget, remember that if you want to move this new table to production, you may think you only need to move data from development to production, but what happens when you refresh your production system over top of your development? You've lost your handy dandy little table that managed that for you. So now I want to restore my productions database, but it's now too big. Over time, it has grown substantially, and I have issues restoring. So as my Cherwell database grows, my ability and time to restore may take substantially longer. And even sometimes those files can no longer feasibly be moved around. And also some organizations have security concerns sharing data. Well, let's look at some alternatives. On the database tab, I can select the export data and lookup structure here. And after export, I can use my handy move table that we created earlier, or I can individually export single business objects. And then when I actually export a single business object and I import it into my newly created database, it will always add records to the destination table, and it already knows all of the fields that are part of my system, and so it matches everything up appropriately, so it's actually pretty easy that way. So what I would do is then I would import the database I exported in step 1 as my new database, and then I would import all of the data that I collected here that needed to come over, and then I'm going to have a new clean database that does not have ticket data. So this next piece is that I need to add attachments to my email, and I need to add customer attachments to email. And my customers are required to complete a form prior to submitting their ticket. When I send my email, I need to attach those forms to the first email that goes out. Well, in your email, you can select the attachments button, which is identified here right next to that little number 1. And on the resulting screen, you can identify what you want to attach. So when I click on that attachment button, this other define rules is going to come up. I can say all attachments or first attachment or last attachment. I can even have include attachments. I'm not sure exactly why that one's there, but I can include the attachments. And then, of course, I can identify what kinds of attachments should be selected and imported there. So that's a neat little way of getting attachments attached to user emails. And Laura, that's really it. So if I'd be happy to hear any problems or questions or anything that some of our customers have, and also what their tricks are.
Great. Thank you, Kim. So that concludes our presentation, as you heard. If you have questions for Kim, it could be on any of the topics that we've covered today, or just any general questions you have, problems you're trying to solve. Now is the time to ask those before we conclude our call. You can use the questions pane, or since we have a smaller audience today, if you'd like to raise your hand, you can go unmuted as well if you'd like to talk directly with Kim. I'll hold the lines open for about 60 seconds to give everyone a chance to submit questions before we drop. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions. If you do think of something after the call, always feel free to reach out to myself or to Kim directly. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. If you're attending the Global Conference, please do stop by our booth. Kim will be there. I'll be there. We'd love to see you. We've got some great swag. If there's nothing further, then we will hope for you to join us again in October for our next Advanced Practitioner call. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.